Prince Edward was expected to join his family at an award ceremony at St James's Palace in London, but was unexpectedly absent after being struck down with a health issue. But Esther, what are your thoughts around this? Because royal experts say that this really would have been comforting, particularly for King Charles, to have more of his family around him during this hugely challenging time.
Prince Edward just walked away with everything. Not because Charles handed it over, not because the palace approved it, but because Edward's lawyers made moves so quietly, so precisely, that by the time the royal family realized what happened, it was already locked in by law. Charles spent years deciding Edward's fate, the title, the property, the legacy. He thought he controlled all of it. He was wrong. Edward didn't fight back publicly. No statements, no drama, just strategy. And now, the inheritance Charles believed was his to give belongs to Edward. Permanently, legally, irrevocably.
King Charles's brother, Prince Edward, was supposed to be joining King Charles for a major event, but he was forced to pull out at the last minute.
The palace never saw it coming. Stay with us, because what Edward's lawyers secured will leave you speechless. A promise 24 years in the making. It started not in a throne room, not in a palace hall, but in a quiet sitting room 2 days before a wedding. June 1999. Prince Edward was about to marry Sophie Rhys-Jones.
The newly married couple will become the Earl and Countess of Wessex, following an announcement earlier today by Buckingham Palace.
Everything seemed settled. The guest list, the ceremony, the headlines, but then Prince Philip walked in. No small talk, no warm-up. Philip sat down and went straight to the point. Sophie later described that moment to the Telegraph. Philip literally walked in and said, "Right, I'd like it very much if you would consider that." He was talking about Edward becoming the next Duke of Edinburgh. Edward was stunned. He had assumed his older brother Andrew was in line for that title. Andrew was louder, more prominent. But Philip had thought about this differently. He wanted Edward to carry his name forward. Not Andrew, Edward. On their wedding day, Buckingham Palace made it official, a public announcement confirming Edward would receive the Dukedom of Edinburgh in due course, when Philip's title returned to the crown. That phrase, "in due course," sounded certain. It involved 3 royals, a written agreement, and a public statement. This was the monarchy making a promise. But nobody said "in due course" would mean 24 years. Nobody said it would survive 2 deaths, a new king, and a moment where a 10-year-old girl was almost chosen over Edward instead. Edward took the smaller title of Earl of Wessex, inspired, oddly enough, by the film Shakespeare in Love. And he waited. He waited through his father's slow withdrawal from public life. He waited through Philip's death in April 2021.
Just received a statement from Buckingham Palace confirming that the Duke of Edinburgh has died.
And he waited through 18 of the most difficult months of his royal career. When Philip died, the Edinburgh title didn't pass to Edward automatically. Under British peerage law, it reverted to Charles as the eldest son. The plan, the long-standing, publicly announced plan, was for Charles to recreate the title and pass it along.
Her Majesty and the Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen and her consort were regal figures.
Charles had other plans. Charles stalls, and the truth comes out. Between April 2021 and March 2023, something uncomfortable was playing out inside the royal family, quietly, without press conferences or public statements. Charles was stalling. To understand why, you need to go back further. Biographer Jonathan Dimbleby wrote that Charles always felt his father treated him coldly, distantly, demanding, and impossible to please. But Philip was warm with Edward. He read to him. He played with him. He specifically chose Edward for the Edinburgh legacy. That kind of thing doesn't leave a person. Not even decades later. Not even when you're king. Author Tom Bauer, who wrote a detailed biography of Charles, said he found it remarkable.
Prince Charles would be able to manage to become King Charles. He had attracted so much controversy that there were genuine fears that the public would not accept him.
Even strange that a man in his 70s could carry that kind of resentment toward a younger brother who held no real political power and caused no public trouble. But it was there, and it showed. In July 2021, just a few months after Philip passed, The Times reported that Charles had decided not to grant Edward the Edinburgh title. Sources were blunt.
King Charles stripped his youngest brother of a long-awaited title in an attempt to slim down the monarchy.
One told the paper directly, "It is up to him what happens to the title, or it will not go to Edward." Another source added, "Edinburgh won't go to the Wessexes as far as he is concerned." Clarence House then made things more confusing, issuing a statement calling any mention of the title mere speculation. Charles publicly justified this with his plan for a slimmer monarchy. Fewer working royals. Fewer titles passed down the line. A source told the Daily Mail that granting Edward the Edinburgh title simply didn't fit that plan, especially since it would eventually pass to Edward's son, James. But that argument had an obvious hole in it. Charles had no problem granting Harry the Sussex title in 2018. Andrew kept his York title even after the Jeffrey Epstein scandal became a global story.
King removing titles and kicking his brother out of his Windsor mansion.
The slim monarchy argument seemed to apply selectively only when it came to honoring Philip's specific dying wish. Then, in November 2022, an even more startling report surfaced. A Buckingham Palace was allegedly considering giving the Edinburgh title to Princess Charlotte, who was 7 years old at the time. Edward addressed this in a BBC interview. Carefully, diplomatically. But the pain underneath the words was visible. He described his father's wish as having been a pipe dream. His father's dying wish was reduced, publicly, to a pipe dream. He kept waiting anyway. The title with a hidden trap. On March 10, 2023, Edward's 59th birthday, and Buckingham Palace announced that King Charles had granted Edward the title of Duke of Edinburgh.
Buckingham Palace announced the new Duke of Edinburgh this week on Prince Edward's 59th birthday.
After 24 years, after 2 monarchs, after the Charlotte rumor, the promise was finally kept. Except it wasn't. Not entirely. Royal experts immediately noticed a detail buried inside the announcement. The title had been granted as a life peerage. It was Edward's alone. It would not pass to his children. When Edward dies, the Dukedom of Edinburgh ends with him. And this was unprecedented in modern royal history. When Philip received the Edinburgh title in 1947, it was fully hereditary. William's Cambridge dukedom is hereditary. Harry's Sussex title is hereditary. Andrew kept his York dukedom even after his public disgrace, and it remains hereditary. Every single modern royal dukedom has been hereditary. Except Edward's. The royal commentator Camilla Tominey of the Daily Telegraph explained the logic plainly. The non-hereditary clause was designed so that when Edward dies, Prince William can give the Edinburgh title to one of his own children, most likely Princess Charlotte. So Charles technically kept Philip's promise. But he rewrote what that promise actually meant. Philip wanted Edward's family to continue the Edinburgh line. He wanted James Edward's son, currently the Earl of Wessex, to carry it forward one day. That will not happen. James will remain Earl of Wessex. The Edinburgh title goes back to the crown the moment Edward is gone. Charles gave Edward a title. He built in an expiry date. The contrast with Andrew said everything. A prince who settled a abuse lawsuit and lost his public role kept his hereditary honor. Edward Loyal, hard-working, scandal-free, received a title designed to disappear. But while everyone was focused on the title, Sir Edward's lawyers had already moved on to something far more valuable. The 150-year deal titles are ceremonial. They carry history and prestige, but they don't pay bills and they don't generate income. The dukedom of Edinburgh, specifically, has no land attached to it and produces no revenue. Property is different. In 1998, when Edward was still the Earl of Wessex, he leased Bagshot Park from the Crown Estate. It's a 120-room mansion set on 51 acres inside Windsor Great Park. Sir Edward put £1.36 million into renovations, rising to £90,000 annually after Edward put £1.36 million into renovations, part of a broader £3 million project, with the Crown Estate covering the rest. The National Audit Office confirmed the rent reflected market value. Standard enough. A royal living in a Crown property. Nothing unusual. Then, in 2007, Edward's lawyers made their move. Operating through his private company, Eclipse Nominees Limited, they paid a one-time fee of £5 million to extend the lease, not by 50 more years, but to a total of 150 years. In exchange, the annual rent dropped to a peppercorn rate. Technically £1 or less per year. Practically, zero. What that means in real terms, Edward now holds a 150-year legal right to a Crown property estimated to be worth around £30 million, secured for a single payment of £5 million, with no meaningful ongoing costs. And the lease has no family restrictions. Unlike Andrew's arrangement at Royal Lodge, which limits inheritance to Sarah Ferguson and their daughters, Edward's lease can pass to his wife Sophie, his daughter Lady Louise, or his son James. He could also, legally, sell the leasehold and realize a significant profit. When the Times reported this arrangement in late 2025, housing campaigners were furious. They pointed out that ordinary British leaseholders face rising ground rents and expensive lease extensions. That while a royal 15th in line to the throne quietly secured a 150-year deal on a Crown mansion. The Crown Estate offered no public explanation of how it calculated the premium. One property law firm reviewed the deal and called it legally indistinguishable from an ordinary long lease transaction. Prestigious, yes, but legally completely standard. That is exactly the point. Edward's claim on Bagshot Park is not based on royal goodwill or a palace promise. It is a legal contract. It cannot be revoked by a king. Charles can reconsider a title. He cannot touch Bagshot Park. Philip's real legacy. When Philip died in April 2021, his financial estate was relatively straightforward. Most passed to the Queen under spousal inheritance law. After the Queen died in 2022,
Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Charles inherited without paying inheritance tax, protected by the sovereign-to-heir exemption. But Philip's real legacy was never about money. It was 70 years of charitable work. I built quietly across the world, starting in 1956. That year, Philip co-founded the Duke of Edinburgh's award with German educator Kurt Hahn. It began as a national youth program in Britain. Over the following decades, it grew into something much larger. Today, the program operates in over 140 countries. More than 1 million young people complete its programs every year. In 2025 alone, over 342,000 young people in the UK started new awards, a record number. And this is not a small charity with a famous name on it. It is one of the largest youth development programs on the planet. And crucially, it runs independently of the palace. Edward had been building his connection to this institution for decades before Philip died. He earned his own Gold Award in 1986, completing a 60-mile, 4-day trek through the Scottish Highlands. He became a UK trustee of the award in 1988. In 1999, he created the International Special Projects Group to help marginalized young people participate. He later became chairman of the International Award Foundation. When Charles granted the Edinburgh title in March 2023, it came with something attached. Edward became the official patron of the Duke of Edinburgh's award and the International Award Foundation. By late 2025, he had expanded further, taking on the royal patronage of Outward Bound, another organization Philip had long supported, with Princess Beatrice joining as deputy patron. This wasn't a ceremonial handover, it was a formal transfer of an institutional legacy that Charles never claimed for himself. Philip's charitable empire, operating across 140 countries, reaching millions of young people every year, now belongs to Edward's stewardship, independently, outside palace control. Charles delayed the title for 2 years. He made it non-hereditary. But the work Philip cared most about was the programs, the global reach, to the daily impact on young lives that runs under Edward's name now. The power move nobody covered. There is one final layer to this story, and almost no one covered it properly. In December 2022, a new law was passed through Parliament. It added Princess Anne and Prince Edward to the group of councillors of state. The announcement was quiet. No big headlines, no royal celebration, just a legal update that most people scrolled past without a second thought. That was a mistake. Councillors of state are the royals authorized to act on the monarch's behalf when the king is abroad or unable to perform his duties. This is not a symbolic role. They can attend Privy Council meetings, sign official state documents, receive foreign ambassadors, and give royal assent to legislation. They exercise actual, functioning royal power, the same power the king holds. Before this change, Harry and Andrew were both on the list. But Harry had relocated to California and was giving interviews that publicly criticized the royal family. Andrew was buried in the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, his public reputation destroyed. Neither man was showing up. Neither was functioning as a reliable counselor when the country needed one. Parliament looked at the situation and acted. The law was updated. Edward and Anne were added. Now here is where it gets interesting. Edward is 15th in line to the throne. Harry sits at the 5th. Andrew at 8th. By the traditional logic of royal importance, closeness to the crown, Edward shouldn't even be in this conversation. And yet, Edward has more active constitutional authority than either of them right now. Proximity to the throne means nothing if you're not trusted to use it. When Charles began cancer treatment in early 2024, the institution needed people it could rely on. Edward, Anne, and William stepped forward. Edward wasn't a background figure managing light duties. He was one of exactly 3 working royals, holding the crown's responsibilities together during a genuine health crisis. Think about what that means. The king was ill. The country needed someone to sign documents, receive ambassadors, and keep the machinery of state moving. Edward was in that room, and this role cannot be quietly removed. Charles stripped Andrew of his military honors through a palace announcement. He made Harry's titles non-working, the same way a decision made inside the palace was communicated to the press. No parliament required. Edward is different. Removing him from the councillors of state requires going back to Parliament, making a public case, and passing new legislation. It cannot be done privately. It cannot be done quickly. Edward's constitutional position is locked in by law, just like his lease on Bagshot Park. So just like Philip's charitable legacy running in 140 countries under his name. Charles can wear the crown. But piece by piece, quietly and legally, Edward made himself untouchable. Edward didn't win by fighting, he won by enduring. While Charles played politics with the title, Edward's lawyers were signing 150-year contracts. While the palace debated which child deserved Philip's legacy, Edward was already carrying that legacy on every continent, with millions of young people, year after year. The monarchy gave Edward a title that ends with him. But everything that actually matters, the property, the institution, the constitutional authority, none of that can be touched. That's not luck. That's 24 years of patience and very good legal advice. We cover the royal stories the palace would rather keep quiet. Drop a comment. Did Charles honor his father's wishes, or did he fail Philip completely? Like the video. We'll see you in the next one.